All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are in the finishing stretch of what's been an amazing week here at CREtech. First of all, I wanted to thank everybody involved with the conference for putting on such an amazing event. I think I'd share everyone's feelings that in these special times, this has really been, I think, a shining light and a masterclass on how to put on an event. So thanks for that. I am very excited to be joined here with three amazing panelists who I know very well and I'm sure are known very well to most, if not all, of the audience tuning in. I will let them introduce themselves in a second. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rich Sarkis, and I founded a company called Reonomy about 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm excited to, as I said, be a moderator on today's panel. So without further ado, Ash, the man, the myth, the legend, the reason why there's a 10-second delay from what you're actually, when we speak to what you're actually hearing, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Thanks very much, Rich. My name is Ashkán Zandieh. I'm the founder of a property tech company called Property IDX and an advisory board member at CREtech and former founder of REtech, which was acquired by CREtech about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. I'm currently in Brooklyn, and before we kick off and kind of start going down the Q&A rabbit hole, I want to thank everyone at Reonomy, Sierra, and Nicole for putting this all together, and Bethany at CREtech. You guys are such rock stars. So first and foremost, thank you guys for putting this all together.
Awesome. Maureen, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience as well, please?
Thanks, Rich. I'm Maureen Tessier. I'm Chief Data Scientist at Reonomy. I've been with Reonomy for a little over 1.5 years. I have an extensive background in high volume distributed compute with machine learning embedded in engineering pipelines. And I'm
also happens to be a computational astrophysicist.
Yeah, that's my PhD. And I currently am in northern New Jersey, just outside New York.
Awesome. Thanks, Maureen. Last but certainly not least, a good friend of mine who I've gotten to know professionally and both personally over the years, Adrian Marcato. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Thanks, Rich. I don't know how I'm going to follow the PhD, but I'm the partner and chief information officer at B6 Real Estate Advisors. We are a capital markets brokerage. My background mostly is in research and product development.
Awesome. Okay, so without further ado, why don't we jump into the content? We'll spend a little bit of time talking about the state of the industry, topic du jour. It seems like it's evolving on a daily or weekly basis. Love to hear your thoughts on what the latest is there. We'll then transition the discussion a little bit to chat about data accessibility and how reliance or use of data has changed over the last weeks and months. And last but not least, love to get some thoughts from this cutting edge panel around any emerging technologies or novel uses of data that they've seen firsthand or are hearing about. And of course, as the Q&A starts rolling in, we'll be sure to pepper questions throughout. So why don't we kick it off with, as I said, the topic du jour, which is COVID. And if the panelists could maybe start by talking about how their businesses have been impacted, and maybe to focus on the last few weeks, because as I said, it's a pretty evolving situation. I think we're all in New York, which has been open now for several weeks. So Adrian, why don't you talk a little bit about how you and the partners at B6 have reacted to COVID?
Yeah, I think from a business perspective, our mission remains the same. I think how we operate, especially now, where we particularly focus on owners and sellers, has been much more of an advisory and insight capacity, trying to get people to really understand what's happening in the market in such a fast changing market, and really try to understand what's going to happen moving forward. Luckily, we've seen since reopening, the market's been thawing a little bit, specifically in the New York market. We're seeing more activity. But I think for us, it's more of the same, and we're a relatively new business, having launched about 2 years ago. So, we're always sort of looking to be on that front step, if you will, helping our clients.
And Ash, you've got your finger on the pulse more than most of both New York City commercial real estate, but also the tech side of things. With Property IDX, you obviously get to see a lot of the inventory, the sales, and the listings, et cetera. What have you seen over the last few weeks? Are you seeing the thawing that Adrian mentioned?
Yeah, it's an interesting statement because I think it's a very asset-specific statement. I think although a high level of economic uncertainty persists, let's not kid ourselves here. I do think that economic activity could be back on track by early 2021 or mid 2021. My day-to-day is to speak with owner-operators, not just in New York, but nationally, on the institutional large family office side, and at the same time work with technology partners from investors and startups. And I think we've had moments like this. However, let's not kid ourselves. I think globally speaking, the industry is literally in the gutter. We are currently, let's not kid ourselves. We're dealing with a global health crisis, social crisis, and in some cities, we're dealing with a policy crisis. In the U.S., at least in transaction volumes are down. Rich, I was just on your platform. I love your platform because I'm getting up, really up-to-date information, and volume is down. Let's not kid ourselves. In New York, we've had pockets of bright moments, like the TikTok deal about a month or two ago. The AIG deal, I think, was announced, this week. Both Midtown leases. And then there was that record-setting $1 billion deal in Brooklyn, that 260 Gold Street transaction. But these are all in isolation compared to the overall market. So no pun intended there. However, I heard a great quote from an owner, and we kind of talked about it on our prep call. Just because one or two flowers bloom doesn't mean it's spring. And I think that's currently the sentiment we're feeling. I think everyone's trying to be optimistic, but reality is setting in, and we have companies like Google making statements that they're not going back to the office until summer of 2021. I think it has a profound impact on occupancy of office space and mixed-use multifamily assets and the occupancy of those assets. And you're seeing it currently, and I think September's around the corner, and we'll see what happens then.
Yeah, I think the period between Labor Day and Thanksgiving is going to be very telling, certainly for New York and the tri-state area, but the rest of the country as well. I agree with you there. Maureen, why don't you talk a little bit, maybe not so much as how Reonomy has reacted as a business. I've talked about that on a number of panels, and to Ash's point, we actually got rid of our office space completely and are now fully remote for the foreseeable future. But maybe if you could talk a little bit about how the focus on data improvements and what data sets we focus on has perhaps evolved, or at least taken into account COVID and the current crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're seeing is that our users are trying to expand their opportunity space. So they're using Reonomy as an investigation tool to look for opportunities to change the patterns of their business. There are states that, if you used to operate in 3 different states, maybe it's difficult to move from state to state because there are quarantine rules. Maybe if you have been tied exclusively to a particular asset type in the past, you want to expand beyond that asset type. And so people are using the platform to find new opportunities. Reonomy's reaction to that is we've become even more focused on improving the recency and the quality of the coverage. We've also focused a lot of our efforts on providing an owner-centric views of properties. So we're working on building out portfolio views of properties, data that is not available in volume or with the coverage in across the United States anywhere else, so that you can interact with a person and understand their entire portfolio is this size, these are the geographical locations where they have properties. This is the tax valuation of these different properties, and really extend the conversations that you have with individuals in a way that was not possible before.
Maureen, I had a quick question. Have you seen search activity? I'm sorry, Rich. Have you guys, and Rich as well, have you guys seen an increase in search activities in like Miami, in Austin, Dallas, Nashville?
Great question. So two things there. One, at the macro level, when you just look at overall activity on the platform, other than the first few weeks in March, when frankly all hell was breaking loose, right? And I think it was the first notions of lockdowns for a lot of the country, and we did see a dip in overall activity there. I think people were frankly just freaking out and not knowing how to deal with kids at home and work from home and all that stuff. We've seen very steady usage and actually spike in activity at a macro level on our platform. Now, to answer your question about specific search areas, we have, interestingly enough, seen a spike in searches for different asset types, specifically warehouse, industrial, some multifamily, not surprisingly, office, retail, hospitality. The number of searches at a macro level on those asset classes is down. Geographically, we have seen a little bit of a spike, or we had seen, I should say, a spike in California. California really was seeing a lot of search volume. I haven't checked, to be honest with you, over the last few weeks since they have gone into not lockdown, but shut down some of the businesses, what that's meant. But that would be interesting for our Reonomy research team to do, certainly.
Yeah, it's funny because I was preparing for this webinar. I was actually on a call late last night with an owner. And I asked him, he's a Reonomy client customer, and I asked him, he's an institutional owner operator, and I asked him, he's not making any investments in New York. And I asked him, where are you looking at? He said, I'm actually looking at in triple net opportunities, but using the likely to sell feature on your platform in states like Florida, Texas, Arizona, and others. So I was like, that's a very interesting, profound statement. I was like, that's really interesting. How the owner operator deploying capital.
For sure. That's actually a good transition, I think, to another related topic, but there's almost this resetting or cleansing that happens as part of a recession or a downturn, et cetera. I think that we were chatting about this prior to the panel, but we've been on a decade-plus bull run. Many, frankly, folks who started out in commercial real estate haven't seen a bear market or haven't really seen a recession. I think the memories of 08, 09 are a distant memory in some people's minds. And for those of us who've gone through that and others, we know that recessions can be an opportunity to look very critically at our businesses and say, well, where did inefficiencies creep in, right? Where did we actually spend money where we shouldn't have? Where did we hire where we perhaps didn't need to? And so if you could, Adrian, talk about how you and B6 have perhaps used this as an opportunity to assess how to use data, technology to perhaps become even more efficient than you were before.
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting thing when you're on a run up in a market. People generally, data and technology is sort of a secondary consideration, right? Because everyone's doing well. They think they're the reason why everything's going well. You get into sort of a recession or you hit a rut, data becomes really important, and understanding that data and insight specifically can be the difference between what makes or breaks or creates winners and losers, right? At B6 for us, our big thing is trying to provide market insights not only, but also insights into sort of what Maureen was talking about, right? Into owner profiling, into really understanding what our clients are doing on our platforms to try and pair the right buyer to our listing or find the right capital opportunity for one of our owners who are going through a portfolio reposition. So, for us, it's really about marrying all of that data that comes in either disparate data sets or filling in the blanks from the Reonomy data that we intake, our user insights, our agent insights, and our agent interactions, trying to create really composite portfolios around ownership, but also just really understanding and insights around what people are doing. So number one, we can better position ourselves in the market in terms of what insights we are providing, but also what type of product we are providing to people and looking to go after. That's really what the focus is.
Yeah, it's interesting. You and I have chatted about this previously, but as a CIO, part of your challenge is always to get the brokers to adopt and use the data and the technology and the tools, right? Have you found that, and then that's hard, right? When the sun's out, everyone's making hay and they're making money, and rightly so. They want to spend their time on the phones with their clients, doing what brokers do best. Have you found now over the last weeks and months, given that, times are tougher, that brokers are perhaps more receptive to data, or even, heaven forbid, coming to you and saying, hey, help me with data and tools and technology? Adrian, if you can speak to that, and then Ash, I'd love to get your perspective on the same thing.
Yeah, I think, given where we are with having to move out of the office environment, I think people are much more receptive to, number one, trying new technology. So adoption is, in our industry, is sort of a slow burn. But, the tools now that people were used to having in the office or being able to do in the office are no longer available. So there's been quite an increase in our adoption of certain products. And from a user feedback perspective, it's been great because we've been really able to sort of zero in on some of our products and features that we're building. So in the sense of some silver linings of moving out of office because of COVID, user adoption has really been one of the positives. And especially, like I said earlier, with insights, people, especially advisors, want to know what's going on so they can provide their clients with good insight and advice. And so, yeah, that's it's been an interesting road, an uptick in our adoption in some of our products. Good.
Are you seeing the same thing, Ash?
Yeah, I echo many of what Adrian's saying. It's my perspective, that data by itself is useless because you need context. There's no context regarding, just data by itself. I think that the job of data is to turn data into information to knowledge, and knowledge to actionable knowledge. And that's the most valuable part. And Rich, you and I have joked about this in private, during lunches and breakfasts and coffee meetups and stuff like that. But I think the beauty of platforms like yours is really the weaponization of real estate data, right? Like, for example, the likely to sell feature is one example of that, and we've talked about that. And in addition to that, the addition of like anyone not using, I'm going to be very clear cut about this. Anyone not using Reonomy for data at this point is really missing out on really future proofing their businesses. Every owner I've ever spoken to is using your platform. So, Rich, you've really created a fantastic product with your platform. Now, on the real estate side, it's interesting to see, to answer your earlier question, Rich, it's interesting to see for the first time in nearly decades, this redistribution of real estate investments into other cities, or the possibility of investing in other cities outside of people's core competency or core locations. So specifically New York and California, you're starting to see owner-operators investing in cities outside of New York and California. You're starting to see lenders lending outside of New York and California. Again, cities, we just talked about Austin, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, but, to put this all into perspective, again, Rich, I was on your site, June 2019 to October 2019, general multifamily transactions decreased by a total average of 10%. So from 329 deals to 210 deals in October. So it's just really interesting to see how owners, what owners are doing, and what they're likely to invest in pre and post pandemic.
It's really interesting. You go to what you're touching on a lot of, I think, is data access, right? The previous recession, as an aside, I worked for a secondary markets company, so we brought non-traditional real estate companies into the markets. And when that recession hit, these companies were holding a lot of assets that they didn't know what to do with because they weren't real estate players. And there was no visibility into market conditions. There was no visibility into market trends. I was literally left to go down to Del City, Oklahoma, and survey brokers to try and get an understanding of what valuations would look like on a particular asset. And it was sort of just, in the wind, and we hope that we got it right. And there's a lot of meat left on the bone. So the last recession, I think, really brought in this need for data access and data in particular. And that brought in a lot of these market reports that you saw. I think now what you're seeing is data access is available, and it's the insights that people are generating and the speed at which they can generate those insights and maneuver their business plans. So, being able to look at a market outside of your core competency was very difficult to near impossible 10 years ago. So that rise in just data access and the accessibility to it all in a 10-year span is really what's driving, I think, a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah, and to that point, Maureen, right, since the data, as both Adrian and Ash said, are the raw ingredients and the raw material that you need to derive the insights that are so valuable, especially in these times. How do you think about, in your position, running the data science team and helping to prioritize a lot of the data initiatives that we have going on at Reonomy? How do you think about prioritizing that and figuring out what to do, what not to do, and how has COVID impacted that from your vantage point?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've doubled down on user interviews. So Adrian, I really, I sympathize and I understand, the conversations that you had, like getting outside the office, talking to people, understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, because we can see signal, but the motivation behind the things that we see, the behaviors that we see in the users is really what we want to identify and really what should be driving the product development there. All of our departments are conducting user interviews. So product conducts user interviews, our business development team conducts user interviews, our design team conducts user interviews to make sure that we're surfacing the information in a way that it's usable and it's easy to understand and interpret for someone that has worked in the CRE space. It's driving increased customization along some of our core market segments. So brokers are a big segment for us. There's a lot of prospecting work. There's a lot of really identifying opportunities, and our ability to surface the identification of opportunities is extremely important right now. And so understanding how people do that and exactly what they're looking for is what is driving the prioritization that we have on the technical side and what our data scientists are focused on.
How do you, sorry, Rich.
No, go ahead.
How do you weigh sort of short-term reaction or impulse from users with long-term planning? I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with, right?
Qualified data. It's qualified data.
Yeah. So to some extent, we're a little bit buffered from that because we're focused on making kind of systematic changes and systematic improvements. So for example, Reonomy doesn't take individual properties and kind of tweak data here and there based on things that we hear. When we hear something that needs to be built, or when we hear there's a change in the way that data is surfaced or the quality of data, we make a programmatic change, right? We have over 50 million parcels across the country. There's just a phenomenal number of kind of sub-markets, depending on how you slice the asset types and which geographic region that you're looking in. And we don't want to do things that are only going to work for a short amount of time and only work for a certain type of user. So we approach things very systematically, and that's why we need data scientists, because it's hard. It's hard to do this for the entire United States.
Yeah, and Adrian, interesting thing is going into this year, one of our big R&D initiatives, which Maureen can more authoritatively and smartly speak about than I can, was to invest heavily in our knowledge graph, which up until now had been very property-centric, right? We're pretty good at telling you what there is to know on a given property. We developed our unique identifier for each property that helps you cleanse and normalize your own data if you've got it programmatically. But what we've been hearing, both pre and post and during COVID, per what Maureen was just talking about, was that our users, it didn't matter if they were brokers, lenders, insurance companies, investor developers, really wanted the interaction between properties, companies, and people. And for basically what translated by the team of data scientists said, well, what they want is to evolve our property-centric knowledge graph to be multi-entity centric. And so that's a big part of what we've been doing. And to Maureen's point, we feel that that is just seminal and really valuable, regardless of what the economic climate looks like. So Maureen, actually to that end, just so everyone who's listening in is perhaps more clued in than I can certainly explain, would you mind spending a couple of minutes just describing what the knowledge graph is and why it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So a knowledge graph is looks like any kind of social graph that you might see, any cartoon that you might think of a graph network, except that in social graphs, you only have people, and there are nodes between the people, and depending on the relationships between the people, there are edges between these people that are nodes within the graph. And so Facebook has a social graph. That's how they build a lot of the stuff that they have. LinkedIn has a social graph. Google, a lot of their marketing is reliant on these types of social graphs. A knowledge graph is different because the nodes are not just people. The nodes are also properties. The nodes are also companies. The nodes are whatever is appropriate for the domain space. But the idea is that the knowledge graph actually represents the world in a more realistic way. So usually when you store data, you have let's say you're in working at a bank, and the data that you have about people is, oh, well, this person is a client, they have a savings account, they have a brokerage account, they're a credit card customer, right? So they're very context-specific views of the person. And what happens is that you lose sight of the complete picture of understanding who this person is. And so for real estate, what happens is that you can say, well, we have a property and we have this person, one person tied to a property, and there are some companies associated, but you're really not getting a complete picture of who this person is, where they operate, what their scope of influence is. And the knowledge graph, because the knowledge graphs represents things in a very kind of realistic, real world thing. So it's a person who is a client of these services, a person who is an owner of these services, a person who is a CEO, a person who is a mortgage signatory within the CRE space. You really get a complete idea of who this human being is, and the best way to interact with them. And so once you've built this structure, we can actually pretty flexibly change the way that we're delivering the data, the different product offerings. So the idea is that you build your knowledge graph, and then on top of that, you can build customizations and add-ons that are supplying the intelligence in the right structures in the right ways for our clients.
And Ash, there's going to be a quiz on this later, so I hope you're paying attention. Just kidding, Ash. There's no quiz.
100%. Give me the clip notes, please.
But I do want to get your perspective, because look, a lot of what Maureen is talking about is definitely bleeding edge, and we're really excited about it. Our customers are excited. What else are you seeing in the CREtech prop tech space that's exciting you? Or are you still seeing a lot of noise, or are you starting to see stuff that is exciting, more tangible, actually more concrete?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've spent a a better part of like 10, 12 years, indexing and analyzing nearly like 8,000, 9,000 private market real estate technology companies and their financial sponsors. What I can tell you is that on a macro level, the global real estate within the global real estate tech world, real estate data and analytics is a $6 to $7 billion market cap. The industry has begun to shift towards a hybrid form of data and analytics, and will be heavily connected to marketplace, IoT, visualization platforms. So you're starting to see this hybrid, very much like yourselves, leveraging other mediums to push data out, like the social graph, property graph, and others. This connectivity will allow owner operators, brokers, mortgage companies, title companies, and others to basically run their businesses more efficiently, greater economic gain, and others. But more on the company side, some of the front runners are starting to emerge from the traditional, through the investment vehicles that are out there, including like Oyo, Spacemaker, Comstack, and of course Reonomy. I think you guys have raised, I think single-handedly, probably the first or second largest collectively round of venture capital in the industry. So kudos to you guys. So yeah, we're starting to see stuff like that. The industry is no longer in this search and discovery phase. The industry is far from the experimental phase now. I think any company that's launching in this space today needs to come well equipped to compete, and it's becoming a higher barrier to market entry business now in the data and analytics space.
Adrian, what are you seeing on your seat? Because you're a consumer, a buyer of a lot of this, and you're a discerning sort of consumer of those. That you've got the technical chops to be able to assess it. Do you feel like you're more able to cut through the noise? And maybe for the folks watching and listening, what would you recommend their strategy is, sort of post and during COVID, to make sure that yes, they've got the mindset where they want to adopt. They realize that it's more efficient. They realize the value in data, insights, etc. But where do they start and what do they do?
Yeah, I think, to answer that, there's sort of two cohorts of users, right? You have users who don't have internal data teams or individuals on their team who can really churn information or connect systems, right? For us at V6, in order for us to be a consumer of any product, there has to be an API layer that we can sort of draw from and connect to. The reason for that, like I said, is we have a lot of brokerages and owners have a lot of data that they create themselves. And I think the real cutting edge advantage for companies is being able to marry that data, that internal data, with external sources and really deriving insights, right? So from that perspective, if you have that internal team, I think you're probably doubling down on accessibility to information and your internal productization of it. If you're a team who doesn't have that capability, you're looking for applications that can sort of be an all-in-one tool. So there's a lot of tools that we use internally. A lot of them focus on marketing. That is what we do. We're a marketer more or less. But like I said, it's really involved around sort of casting the reel and also bringing it back in. So I think people, if you have the ability to get internal players who have that data capability and that application capability, you should do it now. There's tremendous talent available if you have the ability. And if you don't, it's really working with your current vendors to really understand what data and insights you can get out from them.
And that's a good point around the talent. I mean, there is a lot of great talent on the sidelines right now. So to your point, that's an interesting element to this. Anything to add on that, Ash or Maureen? We're coming up on time, and we've got a couple of questions that, from a Q&A perspective, I wanted to make sure we get to.
No, I think everyone's kind of hit the, everyone's touched upon a lot of the stuff. I do think, that again, in terms of market trends, it's not just the data itself, like whether it's venture capital, prop tech data, whether it's real estate data, whether it's owner operator data, phone numbers, emails. It's not the information not the data that's I think most valuable. It's how you actually use the data. I think I always, I bring it down to very simplistic terms. It's like having a beautiful, Lamborghini Gallardo and being a shitty driver. It's,
they generally go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah.
So I think you need to know and know how to weaponize the data to make it actionable information. I think the data in of itself is actually useless in the hands of the wrong person. I think companies like yours, Rich, I think have made it pretty much like idiot proof. It's hard to mess it up. It really is, because you make it so clear cut and concise. I think you have to be able to actually weaponize that information and make it actionable.
Yeah, and I think, look, just to pile onto your Lamborghini analogy, I think it's a good one because not only is it suboptimal to sort of be a crappy driver in a sports car, it's also dangerous, right? Because too much data, too much non-contextual data, you can draw the wrong conclusions. It can actually literally cripple your business, right? And because you get the analysis paralysis and you just don't know what to do with the data, and therefore then the eyes glaze over, and then you say, well, all data is bad data, and then I'm not going to do any data, or not going to turn to data. We did get.
You got to keep in mind, like, we're in the real estate business. Like, real estate is not a hard business. It's actually a very simplistic business with very large.
High low, sell high, right?
Right. Like, it doesn't take. I remember once upon a time I was at a ULI event, and Jared Kushner one time said, "It doesn't take a genius to collect a rent check." And it's true. It doesn't take a genius to collect a rent check, but the reality is it takes a genius to operate an asset, and it takes a genius to do highly structured, complex deals. I think the more complex the situation, the more chefs that are in the kitchen, the worse the soup gets. And I think it's one of those situations where the more data, 100% agree with you, Rich, the more data you have, it is paralysis by analysis. Is again, how do we weaponize that? How do we make it useful? Not just for owners and for everyone. I
think, like, historically, real estate's been run on hunch and feeling, right? There's a lot of knowledgeable people who know a lot of things based on their experience. And now what data is allowing them to do is to form and validate these hypotheses, right? And these propositions that they may have that allow them to, sort of the beginning we were talking about, enter new markets and new asset classes, right? It's weaponizing their hunches, so to speak.
Awesome. Maybe last question for you, Maureen, and I'm sort of paraphrasing one in the Q&A, and it builds nicely on what Adrian was saying. If we all agree that data in and of itself is not enough, it's about the insights and the and what you can derive from it. And Ash, he's cited a few times the likely to sell feature we have on our platform. One of the accusations that's been leveled against machine learning and AI is this sort of black box phenomenon where it'll just say, well, this property is likely to sell, but can't really explain it to you in a way that a human would understand. How do you think about that as you're building features and new functionality within Reonomy?
Yeah, it's absolutely dangerous and scary to build systems that are trying to replace humans. And so with us, we've been very specific about not trying to replace the human, not trying to replace that experience, that intuition that is built over decades. What we're trying to do is just to be able to make more data, the right data available faster in a clean way. So, people on our platform, they don't join with the expectation that, well, there's going to be, you know, that Reonomy.com, app.reonomy.com will pop up and say like, hey, this is the property, and this is the one that you should buy this, or, you know, or this is the person to call, and that's it, right? We make the data available in such a way that you can use your experience and intuition to slice and dice it, filter out the enormous volume of data that we have available. So Likely to Sell is supposed to do that. It eliminates all of the properties that we know have most recently sold, or, you know, there's been some kind of an event, or there's like a market in a geographic area that's incredibly stable, and so we don't think that property is going to move. So it's a way of cutting down on the amount of data to look at and try to understand and build into your strategy. The Likely to Sell model itself has the intuition that comes from CRE actually built into the features that we give to the machine learning algorithm. So we look at not just we look at the property structure itself, we look at the history of the structure, we look at the history of sales, the valuations, like all of the related party transactions. We create a complete picture there, and then we also have owner information attached. And then on top of that, we have information about the municipality, about the neighborhood that the property is in, and all of this behavior that would normally a human would interpret and try to build intuition about. The machine learning algorithm is trying to do the same thing. But we're not trying to replace people. Like there's no replacing humans.
Aspect of it, right?
Yeah, you can't expect that to go well, you know. And if there is a silver lining for everything that's happening in the world right now, it's that it is creating additional incentive for people to explore these new opportunities and platforms that are available because of data, and because we have these computers that can do phenomenally high volume compute. I mean, we process like 100 terabytes of data every week, at least, to be able to deliver the information that you see on the app. And it's a pretty amazing time to be alive. Really is.
Well, that is a perfect way to sign off. Thank you for that, Maureen, and thanks, Ash and Adrian. I thought that was really insightful and interesting. And so it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rich.